Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the meeting for the Standards Committee on Monday, the 11th of March 2024. I'm Tom Ward and Vice Chair of the committee and will be in the chair today. Can I please ask that you switch your phones to silent for the duration of the meeting? Should you wish to ask a question or make a comment, can you please indicate either by raising your hand electronically or if in the room physically. And then we can now move on. First off, item agenda number 2 is declarations of interest. Are there any interest to declare? If yes, Nadine will forward an electronic version of the declaration of interest form to you for you to complete and email back to her. Any declarations? On screen?
I see no declarations, Chair.
Thank you. For 3, we have the minutes of the meeting from the 10th of October 2023 before us to approve accuracy. Can I ask for a proposer and a seconder, please?
I'll propose.
Okay.
I'll second.
Sarah.
Sarah, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, confirm these minutes have been approved, Chair.
Thank you. Agenda item number 4, whistleblowing arrangements. I'd like to ask Anne-Marie to give an overview of this week.
Thank you, Chair. Afternoon, members. I won't keep you long. Just give you a quick, maybe put a bit of meat on the report before you. This is the report that comes to you annually. I would just like to give members assurance that the whistleblowing policy and the whistleblowing arrangements are very well embedded across the authority. I think that's evident from the table within the report that shows the number of concerns raised. The concerns raised during 23-24 again have covered 3 directorates across the authority, which gives me comfort to know that it is out there across the authority. I would also like to give members assurance that it's in no way hidden, the disclosures that are made. They are fully investigated. Formal report is issued. The distribution list of those reports is to the Chief Executive, the Corporate Director of the directorate concerned, the Head of Service and our external auditors, that is Audit Wales. Therefore, the full details of the allegation, work done and any findings are widely known. There is very strong buy-in from our chief officers to the whistleblowing policy and any investigations that are done, and any recommendations that are then made following on from the work that we do. And I then do some follow-up. If I make a recommendation, then I will follow up 3, 4, 6 months, some of them. Where I deem it may take a bit longer for the recommendation to bed in. It could be 18 months later when I'm still going back and forth saying, okay, remember, we agreed this. What's happening? Can you show me? In addition to that, I do report on all of the whistleblowing investigations done. I report fully to the Governance and Audit Committee in the private session, where they're also given full details of what the allegation was, what investigation was undertaken, and the result of that. We don't really have much more to say, but I'm happy to answer any questions that members may have.
And then 2 things really. Are there any learning and development opportunities accruing as a result of the whistleblowing that you then enact with a view, hopefully, to preventing these things becoming issues in the future? That's one thing. And the second thing relates to the training of those who investigate whistleblowing. and what processes you go through to select people to act as the investigating officer, if you like.
Firstly, when I do the investigation or my senior auditor does the investigation, if we feel that there has been a breakdown in any of the internal controls, then we will make a recommendation as to what should be done to tighten those controls to make sure it can't happen again. If we feel that it needs to move on to a disciplinary, then that will happen. If it's a feeling that I think could be within other departments across the council and not specific to the department where the staff member is working at that time, then I'll issue an email to the chief officers to say, this came up in X section. You may want to pass this on to your accountable managers that this is what should be being done. In relation to the training, the whistleblowing investigations are undertaken primarily by myself and by the senior auditor. We have both been trained in the ACAS investigation process. So we've had what I consider to be, the gold standard of those investigations, and every investigation is very tightly controlled.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Anyone else? On the screen?
No questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. Please report. And just for everyone's, this report is merely for noting by the members here. We move on to item number 5, to the member officer protocol. And I'd like to ask Craig to introduce the report, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. So members, of course, will be aware we've been very familiar over the last couple of years looking at the members' conduct and various aspects related to that. It is also important to note that as employees of Neath Talbot Council, we also have our own employee code of conduct, which sets out all our ethical provisions and making sure then that we act in accordance with all the known principles which we've come to expect members to comply with. We did bring a version back to the Standards Committee probably 15, 16 months ago, and we had a few comments that came out of it. They were then considered by our Personnel Committee, which have the responsibility for considering the employee code of conduct and endorsing then any changes that come with it. So it's brought back today, primarily just for information purposes. You can see some of the feedback has now ultimately been incorporated. Again, ultimately, if you see then as well the basic principles in which the code then operates under. It's an ongoing document. It's a very live document which we look to change and implement or amend whenever we feel there are opportunities where we need to tighten up on various matters. But again, before you today, just for some comment, in case there's anything additional you may wish to add, anything you think is missing, or anything you would like to see then be considered by the Personnel Committee going forward. So happy to answer any questions, but here today just for the comment, Chad.
Anyone, any questions? Go to the screen first. No, Caroline? I think Sarah?
thank you.
No, I'm
Thank
good,
you.
thank you.
And in the room? Okay.
Sorry, very comprehensive, but with its comprehensiveness comes length. It's a big document to digest, and most of it I found easy to understand, read. Given that it's saying that all employees, I think if there's any scope to reduce its length, or the language running through plain English campaign, I think that's something that we should do as a record anyway. Quite often when you're writing policy type documents, we know what we want to say, but the person at the other end interpreting it sometimes, if the language is complex, that can present a challenge. So, I was happy reading it, but I think it might well be worth asking a small representative sample of the workforce just to check it, including trade union representatives, to make sure they're comfortable with it. If they are, and this is what's before us, then that's fine. I don't see a problem.
Get back in chat. Yeah, absolutely. So I think just to give you an idea about how this document was ultimately developed, it took the initial draft, obviously, that we had in existence, which you would have seen previously and commented on. It then goes through numerous working groups, which would be our trading and colleagues and the staff council, which comprises various different representatives. We've also been undertaking a very different approach in designing our HR policies and organisational development approaches, where we're bringing together workshops of different managers, different officers to talk through it, to see if they understand it, are there any concerns ultimately. So all of that engagement ultimately happens. And what we've also now changed our approach to is when we are having officer induction programmes, whereas before it's been very much down to individual sections, there are now overarching programmes where specifically employee code of conduct is one of those matters which will be explained and digested to the various individuals there. So we've tried to change the model now in which we try to get the messages across as to what the key principles are.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, nobody has, sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
just echo Duncan's sentiments really. I think it's very comprehensive and it's good to see the version control there and that it is amended as necessary as well. Just an observation really.
I think Craig is now part of the induction process for the new employees and everything. Yeah. Look, there's anything else? Again, this document was just promoting by us, and I'm sure that as and when it gets reviewed, it will come back before us for.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
indeed.
Okay, and move on to item number 6, to consider the process the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales adopt in respect of Code of Conduct complaints. And again, I'll ask for Craig to introduce this review.
So this was something that we talked about in our previous meetings, where I was explaining about when a complaint is ultimately made against an elected member, what the process is ultimately then that the Ombudsman takes on board in making a determination whether this is something that they wish to investigate or not. So the report which I brought before you today is just about trying to give that overview as to when a referral is made to the Ombudsman. How do they then determine whether this is something ultimately they want to take forward? And I think it was specifically something Councillor Carrie Edwards raised previously when she was asking about, well, we've seen evidence of the Ombudsman not considering matters where referrals to be made, but how have they ultimately made that determination? And I think whilst everyone has got different opinions as to whether certain decisions were correct or not, what the Ombudsman Office has been trying to do is put a framework in place then to try and make that determination, which understandably they have to do given the volume of complaints which are forwarded to them. But the first element ultimately that they will be considering is this two-stage test, as what it's ultimately become known. So the first stage will ultimately be considering is there evidence that a breach has ultimately taken place? And what they will do is they'll look at the information which is ultimately before them and say, well, if a breach was to be identified, is there enough evidence to sustain that there is a breach ultimately in place here? It's not, for example, like it would be within the magistrates court setting when it's a beyond all reasonable doubt. Here, it's what they call the balance of probabilities. So is it more than likely that there has been a breach of the code of conduct in that regard? If they feel then that is the case, they will then move to what's called the public interest test. And it's probably the public interest test is the one where most cases ultimately end up falling as part of their referral. And the way in which they approach it is this something which is of a serious concern and therefore it would benefit the public ultimately by being an investigation as part of the process? And I don't think there is a right or wrong answer from my own perspective as an auditor officer in this regard. There's been areas which I may think perhaps satisfy the public interest because it's important that we take those elements forward. But then when somebody is looking at it maybe from an objective perspective and far looking at what's going on in an all Wales level, they may ultimately decide, no, it doesn't. It's just political dialogue. It's just something of nothing in that scheme of things. So what the guidance then from the Ombudsman says is they will look at a number of different factors to try and make that determination. And as part of that, they will look at the seriousness of the breach. So is it so serious that a sanction then may ultimately end up having to be imposed? So that's why it's appropriate then that they do consider it. Did the member deliberately seek personal gain for themselves or another person at the public expense? So did something come out of that determination where that person stood to benefit in some way personally? Has the person misused a position of trust or authority and caused harm to another? Now, it's interesting that they don't give much guidance as to what the term harm ultimately means in this regard. Is it psychological harm? Is it physical harm? It's very much looking at the individual circumstances to determine whether a harm has potentially been identified. And it's very interesting is that the Ombudsman Office often uses a phrase which they call thicker skin. And it's a approach I'm not particularly keen on in that sense, because they take the view that people who are in the public face of things should have a thicker skin, and they should be subject to perhaps a degree of more criticism and be willing to take that criticism as part of that process. I think that can sometimes be too strong. We are all human, we've all got feelings, we've all got processes that we follow. So just because somebody is suffering from it from their perspective doesn't necessarily mean that they've got that thick skin and they should have to accept it in that regard. They look to see whether the breach was motivated by any form of discrimination. Again, all members are told they have to comply with the Equality Act and treat people equally. So if there's a case that they're not complying with that, then that will obviously be an aggravating factor that decides then whether they wish to accept it or not as part of that process. And they will look at a lot of the individual circumstances surrounding it. So the takeout, I guess, you can get from it is there is no overarching system that will ultimately make a determination whether something is going to be considered under the public interest. It's about looking at the individual circumstances to a case, trying to balance it against some of those overarching principles that are ultimately there. And that will be that. I think it would be a miss, though, not to realise that obviously with the volume of complaints that the public service ombudsmen deal with, and that's not just member complaints, that's service complaints relating to the 22 local authorities in Wales, the health boards as well, they do have to operate by a stringent interpretation of that test, otherwise they could undoubtedly find themselves being swamped with a number of member complaints. In recent meetings that I've been in with the Ombudsman Office, they have said that they are looking to dedicate more resources now to looking into the issue of member-related complaints and making sure that they can target those members that ultimately seem to be appropriate for taking forward there. So once the Ombudsman then has all that information, they usually have about a 6-week period then where they make the determination whether they are going to take it forward. If they do, then the member will be notified, and then ultimately the investigation process will follow from there. If it's the case they're not going to be taking it forward, they'll write out to the member of the public who made the complaint to provide a decision notice as to why that ultimately is the case. It's interesting that the Ombudsman has actually changed their approach now, because it used to be the case as soon as a complaint was ultimately received, they would notify the member in question the complaint had been received. Now they don't. They take the view that they will do their investigations first and then make a determination whether it is something they want to investigate, and then they will notify the member to give an overarching position. I think undoubtedly just to try and make sure the member is not worrying immediately about what a complaint ultimately. And at that stage, it is all private in that sense, so nothing goes into the public domain as part of that determination. The investigation process then that they will follow if they're proceeding is speaking to individuals. They may take witness statements, they'll gather all of the information they feel necessary. It could be the case they'll come to the monitoring officer to ask for further information or to provide various documents. You'll see from our private report then later on the ultimate process they follow when they do then decide that they wish to take those matters forward. So I just wanted to bring that to now the committee so you could see the process that they do follow and perhaps explain the rationale of what we were picking up on previously, whether sometimes there can be that lack of certainty as to what approach the Ombudsman will take. I appreciate it, it's not going to give us a categorical position whenever a complaint that comes in, whether it is something that is going to be investigated or not. But everything now is ultimately about being assessed in line with that framework in order to make a determination. So a few things to take on board then, Chair, but happy to answer questions or concerns members have.
Go to the screen first, then. Yeah, Carly.
Yes, I discussed this last year with Craig. I had made a referral as a third party to the Ombudsman. I felt quite a serious breach in as much as one councillor libelled another councillor on Facebook, on social media. Now, it was so abusive that it sort of was calling this one councillor into disrepute when he actually hadn't done anything. The Ombudsman didn't think that it was in the public interest to look into this, but that one councillor, his name was, being bandied about badly in the local community, which is not good for us as local councillors. And also, I feel quite strongly, you know, the Ombudsman and the Wales Audit Office, they all say, oh, we're under-resourced, we haven't got enough staff. Do understand that the Ombudsman gets an awful lot of trivial complaints, which they don't have time to look into, but they don't give us any leeway. You know, they say, well, you've got to do your stuff on time, you've got to do it right, but they say, oh, we haven't got enough resources to do our work properly. So I think that's a bit unfair, really, you know. So we'll just have to see how it goes now that we've perhaps discussed it with them. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from there, I think, Councillor Edwards. I think, you know, from what I could gather, picking up on the point I was mentioning earlier on, is they tend to take the view that if an elected official is named in a post, no matter whether it's correct, incorrect, or there's a background ultimately behind it, the thicker skin element ultimately comes into it, that people should have the opportunity to actively criticise, comment, whatever the case ultimately may be, and right or wrong for the approach. They tend to take that view that no elected officials are deemed to have that thicker skin, and therefore it's not something that they would ultimately take forward. So I think that's one of the commonly used elements we do tend to see at the moment within standards referrals.
Anyone in the room?
Thank you, Craig.
No, not for such.
Just a question, really, Craig. Forgive me ignorance here, but would an elected official be covered by the Health and Safety at Work Act?
They're not for the same purpose as ultimately there, and they're not deemed to be officers for those purposes. We obviously try to do what we can to help support, guide, and put a range of results on is, but from a very pure legal perspective, they're exactly.
Because Health Safety at Work Act has direct harms listed, and it could be helpful in that regard, but if they're not covered, then it's a
So we look to try and address that in different ways. For example, one of our programs of work within our Democratic Services Committee at the moment is to look at member intimidation and harassment, about what avenues ultimately could be there to support them, and different ways that we can try and address that going forward. But it's something that is becoming a lot more evident, particularly on social media at the moment, with the different levels of abuse and harassment that are there. So we're looking at ways from a Neath Talbot perspective how best we can support all members in that process as well. So it's certainly an ongoing identified on something we want to carry on building on.
Yeah, and I think just a final point is your observation on psychological harms. In my experience, for 20 years working with ACAS, is that psychological harms are by far and away the biggest source of the problem. So I would say 95% of organisational-based harms are related to psychological harms rather than physical harms. People know you can't go wallop someone in the workplace, so it does happen. But psychological distress that can be caused through terminology, inappropriate, even down to demeanour and looks and behaviours, that's where the biggest problem lies. So, but yeah, I would concur with you. This term thick skin, I think, is unhelpful actually.
Anyone, anything else?
No, not from me.
Yeah.
Thank you. No, thank you.
Room, all done? Thank you very much. And again, this report is for noting for us, and I'm sure if there are any updates, and perhaps this terminology, thicker skin, is there any way we can? No, it's not actually written down anywhere.
It actually is.
Yeah.
It's in the Ombudsman's guidance note. They do.
Is there any way we can appeal or still to change that?
We can certainly make recommendations in that sense. We can make a review to the Ombudsman. I mean, if one of the actions we want to take away from today is to elect maybe to be issued to the PSOW, suggesting that they need to give consideration to that phrase. That's absolutely
changing the terminology or something like that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think my skin was crawling when I heard that too. I think my background as a mental health nurse as well, when you look at the effect of that psychological harm, to tell someone they should have thicker skin is just unacceptable in this day and age.
I know there's no point in being a police officer on the streets. You know, sometimes you so much abuse, and like people say, oh, police officer, you should expect it. Wow, that's wrong. Nobody should expect abuse like that.
No.
Well, yeah, if there is something we can. Sorry, Councillor Thomas?
Thank you. So my understanding of the terminology around the having thicker skin is actually not for the people that are accused of things. It's rather for the people that are making spurious complaints, and that instead of making these petty complaints all the time, that people should be a bit thicker skinned and less likely to complain. And I think Louise made a really good point last time we talked about this. She said like the word resilient was a much, and I think that's a much better word because it doesn't have those negative connotations the way have thicker skin does. So maybe we could recommend that, you know, having resilience would be a better way of phrasing it.
Okay, thank you. I mean, this is just a personal perspective. I think bottom line is everybody should be treated equally. Pure and simple. I know it's in the big bad world, it's not quite as easy as that, but that's my personal view on things.
Yeah, and like just an observation, I would concur. I think in morals and ethics, there are some foundations and principles, and the way we treat each other is one of those things. To expect one particular group of individuals to be more resilient, have thicker skin, whatever language you choose, it ultimately is a form of discrimination because you are looking to treat someone differently from one group compared to another group. And we should all expect the same. No, yes, we know the harsh reality is something else, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be debating this with an ombudsman's office to look for an appropriate term.
Yeah, Karen?
Yes, yeah, just to come back on Sarah's point, really. I think part of the problem is what I call on social media, because you get a group of people, you know, you put something up, perhaps it's quite a healthy, good comment report, and immediately you'll get somebody attacking it, and then the rest of the gang will pile in, you know, and it'll go on and on and on. So you know, that's bad for the person that put that first comment up. So, you know, I don't agree with the thick skin. I think we should all be treated with respect, and other people who are doing these things should know their place too and respect us and others. Thank you.
I could just come back Chair, just to explain that, just for the sake of completeness, the term thicker skin is not something that the Ombudsman has created themselves. It's something like association in some high court cases that are actually being determined. So it's not something that the Ombudsman themselves have specifically come up with. They're just taking some principles and some of the case law that's out there at the moment.
Thank you, Chair. There's a huge difference between accountability, which we all are accountable, and abuse. And I make it a practice as a local member not to respond to social media in terms of abuse or criticism. I will suggest to that individual always to email me. I think it's far better because everyone and anyone is looking at the response, and it just adds fuel to the fire. But I think I don't think any of us, whatever role we're in, deserves to be abused, particularly when people lie about you and say things. I'm very fortunate, I gotta say, I haven't had that treatment, but I see some of my council colleagues having it, and it's unnecessary.
Just to pick up now, I was just looking at the Ombudsman guidance and the specific reference to it, and what they say is one of the important issues that has to be determined in these matters are the politicians' right to freedom of expression. The court reiterated that the law requires politicians to have thick skin and be tolerant of criticism and other adverse comment. However, the court has noted that while public servants are open to criticism, including public criticism, it is in the public interest that they are not subject to unwarranted comments that disable them from performing their public duties and undermine confidence in their administration. So they have tried to create a little bit of a caveat of surrounding it. But the fundamental principle that come out of it is that basically the law requires politicians to have a thick skin and be tolerant of that level of criticism that ultimately comes with it.
It's interesting, isn't it? There's a junior minister who's been criticised in the current government in London, Westminster, for attacking two academics without foundation, without principles, having to pay out £15,000 out of the public purse, and yet has not retracted the comments. So you know, it can work both ways. Those who are in the highest office and those who are on the receiving end are unable to defend themselves unless they seek legal action to do so. So it's an endemic problem, not just in this country, it's an endemic problem in society. all we can do is we'll continue to work hard to try and minimise the harm.
So, obviously, as a result of what you just said, can you see any point in us?
I mean, it's always difficult to know, see the approach that an ombudsman will take. However, if it's the view of the standards committee that we want to put forward a suggestion at that point, that maybe they can avoid using that such phrase in any response sectors that are going issued, or as part of that, they may be able to consider that as part of the process. But in any event, writing a letter to them may invite a response, which hopefully we can bring back here and just see how the ombudsman office does take that suggestion in that regard. So I'm happy to take that away as a program chat.
Good. We're doing. Yes. Sorry, Councillor Edwards again. Oh,
Legacy harm, sorry.
okay. Yeah, thank you, Craig.
Thank you very much.
Again, this report just for noting, and obviously we'll await any response. Agenda item number 7, observation meetings. Again, call on Craig to proceed.
Thank you, Chair. So obviously a few members now will have attended some town and community council meetings over the course of the last few months. It was agreed that we would have a sort of format of observation, which would just record then obviously some of the basic principles that you found. They are now brought back before the committee today for noting, and obviously if there's any comment that any individual members wish to have associated with it. I think the positive ultimately that we could see that no concerns were ultimately raised, a couple of minor points ultimately were picked up by individual members, and I have now shared that feedback back to the clerks of those meetings ultimately you attended, so they could see and they could take those issues into account. But obviously just before members today, take Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions or invite any comments from that. I will be in the process, sorry, of sending out in due course a list of all other meetings coming for the full civic year. Most councils will be setting those in early May, so members will be able to pick some opportunities to attend any further ones as the year goes on.
Okay, thank you, Craig. Any questions from the screen? Councillor Thomas?
Yeah.
Thank you. So I did attend the Pontardawe one. I was actually waiting for the Kilabebych Community Council invite, which I never received. So I haven't submitted mine yet. I was going to submit them both together. But I will submit this Pontardawe one to you if you'd like, Craig. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Craig. I guess I've read the reports, and I just say it's really quite good that the community councils are performing quite well. I just wanted to check. I chaired one meeting which Louise attended and introduced the clerk myself, and didn't introduce the other councillors. I wasn't sure whether I should have done that or whether the standards committee member is sort of there partly incognito, as it were, or just on the sidelines, you know. So perhaps clarification on that would be good, because it's no hardship just to go around the table with names so that people know who's who. Thank you.
In essence, as collectively as representatives, you're there in just as a member of the public in that sense. So you have no official status ultimately in the meeting. You're there to observe as a member of the public is ultimately entitled to do and then reporting back. So there's no compulsion certainly for you to do that, Councillor Edwards. Yeah, obviously if you choose to do so, that's absolutely fine. Obviously some members are aware that there is a standards committee member present. It could be beneficial for the running of the meeting, knowing that a standards committee member is there. But there's no compulsion on you certainly to do that.
You? Yeah.
Yeah, can I just say, unfortunately, I had sound problems, and I think it was my end. I'd left the meeting, tried to get back in, but didn't get back in. Lesson to self, attending the meeting rather than do it online, because I did have difficulties.
There'll be plenty more opportunities.
I'm sure.
Oh, stop. Hold on. Thank you, Craig. Moving on. Item number 8, grant of dispensations and renewal of grants in section 81.4 Local Government Act 2000. Again, you, Craig.
Thank you very much. So we had 2 by-elections recently in Neath Talbot Council for the Rose Ward following the sad passing of Councillor Marcia Spooner, and the Britain Ferry East Wards following the resignation of Councillor Chris James. 2 new members were elected, Councillor Gareth Rice and Councillor Bob Woodford. And usually the process would be then we extend the same dispensations which have been granted to all members following the annual general meeting in 2022 to these members going forward. The only additional ones potentially being added here are in respect of Councillor Gareth Rice. He has a great niece attending a Skolgate Baglan, and so therefore we'll be asking for a dispensation in respect of school reorganisation proposals to speak, but not vote on issues which relate to school reorganisation where it relates to that member's particular interest. And also as well, Councillor Gareth Rice is a member of Tonna RFC. So it's not something that would be prejudicial for him in respect of any decision making that will come forward. So again, before Standards Committee to speak and vote on matters. And also Councillor Bob Wolford is a member of Pontardawe Town RFC. So again, to speak on matters relating to Pontardawe Town RFC, but it's very rare these matters will ultimately come before any decision making in that regard. Councillor Gareth Rice is also a member of the Friends of Jersey Park, Neath District C Cadets and the Ferry Resource Centre. So again, would also be asking for dispensation to speak and from a Standards Committee perspective, I'm more than happy that you would be capable of granting it. I'm just going to point out a small typographical error. Paragraph 29, I refer to the annual meeting 2022, it should be 2027. Which will be the date after the next local government elections that will take place. So just before you say chair, for the members to be.
Okay, all in favour? Yes. On the screen, yes. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair.
And
Yeah.
okay. Grant of dispensation under section 1814 Local Government Act 2000. And again, Craig, if you introduce them.
Indeed. So this is the request that's come in from Ridley Ferry Town Council, who are asking for 4 of their members who are users of the facility provided at Ridley Ferry, which is a community meal service, to have a dispensation to be able to speak and vote on such matters when they are discussed at the town council. From a legal perspective, that is absolutely acceptable, provided they don't stand to benefit financially in any way from the dispensation that is now being offered. So if members are happy that dispensation can then be offered, I can go back to the Town Council to confirm the case as well. So it will be to speak and vote in issues relating to the business of Liberty Hall, provided that the dispensation will not apply in circumstances where a member of the public might feel that their impact will actually be impacted. So, for example, again, if they stood to benefit financially, or there was something else they were gaining as part of that process.
Anybody, any questions? Screen, no, thank you. Can I have a proposer and seconder, please? Duncan, okay, thank you very much. Number 10, independent review of the ethical standards framework. Summary of consultation responses published by Welsh Government.
Oh, great, thank you again. So back about 18 months, almost 2 years ago now, there was a review that was ultimately undertaken by a document called the Penn Commission, which was designed ultimately to look at the review of the standards regime throughout Wales in respect of local authorities, town and community councils, and other areas as well. And they made a number of recommendations as part of the proposals that they were sort of setting out. And I brought a report back to the Standards Committee for us to give an opportunity to comment on some of the recommendations that were coming forward. And members will see then Appendix A of that report. I've got a copy of the consultation response then that we ultimately ended up submitting. So just before members today is the consultation and summary of responses which the Welsh Government received as part of this from a number of different organisations. A lot came from obviously principal councils, so and council committees, standards committees, and authorities, and a number of different organisations as well. And I think what we can basically see is most people tend to agree a lot with the comments that ultimately we were putting forward. So there was nothing there which came out of the ordinary from some of those matters that we were ultimately considering. Where it will be now is the Welsh Government will go away and consider it, and it may see some changes in policy, some legislation, or various other different actors which may sort of come back to the Standards Committee for us then to look at implementing. So nothing specifically to do on it at the moment, Chair, but ultimately I think we keep a watching brief to see how this progresses now. course of the next couple of months and years. And these things tend to take a while to make some changes. So I'm not expecting anything in the next couple of weeks, but that way.
In the room this time, any questions, anyone?
No, just very comprehensive and good to see that engagements taking place and comments are being absorbed and how to be reflected upon. So all part of the due process. So good.
Thank you. And screen, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, Chair.
No? Oh, thank you very much. Again, this report is just for noting.
Very much.
Item 11, this is the information about the third meeting of the National Standards Committee for Wales and an opportunity to consider any issues raised.
Thank you, Chair. So our usual chair Louise attended the forum meeting for us at the end of January as the representative of the Standards Committee. Obviously, she being here today, she might be able to feedback on some of the bits ultimately she saw, but what I've just tried to do is give a short overview as to some of the matters that were considered there. So they talked specifically about the responses that came out of the consultation and the consensus that ultimately surrounded most people's views on it. A little bit of a talk about corporate joint committees. So members will note from previous discussions that we are the Standards Committee for the South West Wales Corporate Joint Committee as well. It's interesting that every authority is still sort of questioning in the need ultimately for a specific standards committee to consider these matters when most of the representatives are representatives from other county borough councils. So there may be a little bit of duplication there, but nevertheless, ultimately, it's required by law that we have it. So it's something that we just keep a watchful eye on. I can just report from the CJC perspective because I'm also the monitoring officer. There's no issues ultimately for you to be aware of at this stage, but I'll bring an annual report back to you on CJC related matters for your consideration. There are some changes ultimately that are coming into being in respect of remuneration for independent members. It's something our Standards Committee will receive a note, sorry, our Democratic Services Committee will receive a note on shortly because they are talking about us offering an hourly rate for something maybe which could be over and above the half-day requirements ultimately which members are paid for at present. Once that has been determined and bottomed out, I will come back to you all collectively to make you aware of that, just so you know what it says. A little bit of talk about local resolution protocols. You've had a report previously that says obviously our protocol is in place and today we haven't had any referrals in it in the last couple of years. But nevertheless, we are trying to encourage its taker, obviously for members ultimately to be aware of it if they need to use it. And I've also offered a copy to all our town and community councils so they can decide if they ultimately want to adopt it. The Ombudsman recommends a local resolution protocol for the town and community councils. It's not compulsory, but we've offered ours out as a model that people may wish to follow if it's something that will benefit them. Group leaders, statutory duties, not something that's applicable here in Neath, Talbot, but in some cases there are group leaders who are on a standards committee. And it was questioned, could they be independent enough to be able to consider various matters in that regard? So they are thinking about some updated guidance to be available there. My own personal view is that I wouldn't want to see a group leader in standards committee as a standing member because it would be very difficult for them to give the assurance back to the committee that they are complying in these areas. So that's the approach I tend to pursue as much as possible. The gifts and hospitality threshold, we obviously had a report previously, all the other authorities are now progressing and taking that through their system, so that seems to be going well. Social media guidance was something that the consensus is needed, and of course we are now looking at this from our own standards committee perspective as well, so that's positive there. And finally, there were some discussions about the town and community council civility and respect pledge. So that's a local council clerks organisation suggesting that town and community councils may wish to consider signing up to that. It's something that we as a county borough council signed up to prior to the local elections in 2022, encouraging healthy debates, civility in all aspects of the way in which that's approached. So one of the points I've suggested at the end there is the committee may wish to consider encouraging community councils in Neath, but ultimately to sign up to the pledge if they haven't done so. And if it's something that you wanted to sort of promote, I'd gladly write out to the clerks to make them aware of this, that it could be something that could be beneficial for them. So that's all about it, Chair.
Okay, and any questions from the screen, please?
I just think, Chair, that it's a good idea to write to the clerks and get them signed up to that pledge, because it's quite difficult to get good clerks. I've got two very good ones now at the moment, you know, and they're very keen to do training and get on board with everything. So I think that's a very good idea. Thank you.
Thomas?
Yep, I would absolutely second that. I think it's an excellent idea. And the more we get the community councils involved and educated on these things, the better it can be. So.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. From the room?
Echo the
I think
comments.
that's all exactly what's been said there. Yeah. Yeah, Craig? You get everybody on board and know where we are then.
Indeed, it make my life much easier in that sense. I never had to bring a report again, but see where it comes to that.
Well, I think you also have an audit trail then of those who've signed up to it.
Yeah.
And if there are breaches, you can, well, hang on, you said you've signed up to this principle, and it just gives us a better defence position, I think.
Yeah. And item number 12, forward work
Yeah,
programme.
just before even voting, obviously, we have our last meeting of this civic cycle in April, so we've got a couple of items which would be going there. At the next meeting, we'll start moving forward on what are some of the matters we want to look at in respect of 24-25 civic year. But for now, just to give an overview of some of the matters where we are with it and what we'll be doing in future. So.
Okay. And if there's no questions there, we'll move on. 13 urgent items. I haven't got any urgent items. Anybody want to bring anything to the table? No, thank you very much. Members, at this point, we have to item number 14. Access to meetings, exclusion of the public. Members, at this point, we have to consider the information contained within the private report. Are members in agreement to move on to the private session? Yeah, thank you. I propose, if I could have a seconder, please.
I'll second.
Thank you very much.
Move into private. I'll just stop the recording now, and there's no press or public here.
Well done.